we have a little bit of time to take some questions from the audience. Anybody have a question? Yes.
Out of all of you, are any of you self-published, or did you go through an agent or a publisher?
I think that
I went through a publisher and went self-published. In a way, I sent an acquisition letter with a brief summary of the book, but it's not like a Stephen King publisher or anything like that.
I actually do all of mine by myself. I have been for the past 5 years. Because like sending out things to publishers and literary agents, it's kind of like trying to find a job in California during a recession, which is quite impossible almost. But I actually have not attempted to find another publisher. I think I'm going to, because I've written 19 books now, and I think it's time to start actually putting the time into trying to find publishers and agents and things like that.
And you've been publishing through CreateSpace?
Through Lulu, actually,
Lulu,
which is a little bit more costly whenever the distribution goes down.
I've gone through publishers mostly. There's one sitting right there. But this
Let's keep you up at night.
yeah, right.
That's right.
This
There's
one
a
was
lot of trauma and quivering. Not being able to sleep.
right, exactly. This one was put up by a company out of Cincinnati called Postmortem Press, and I've worked with them, and they're actually really great guys to work with. Burning Bulb, new book just came out from a little publisher in Massachusetts called Grinning Skull, and they're just e-publish only, but I mostly deal with publishers. Yes, sir.
I know that you guys have some strong feelings about publishers, since we're on the topic of publishers editing without the consent of the writers, and I was wondering if that influences your decisions to self-publish or to go with the publishers you choose. Chris, if you'd like to jump in on that answer.
I have an editor, a personal editor, who edits every single one of my books. Now, it is pretty taboo to edit in a writer's work, especially if you're going to make changes that would be, there are people who actually do make changes that are inappropriate to a writer's work. Now, I've heard the one fella, Michael Sabo. Michael Sabo. Yeah, he had a horror story where that happened to him.
Well, actually, his didn't turn out so bad. There was another author on the same publisher that had some problems, but I believe that's also the publisher that's with, and that's been very, very happy with.
I was actually going to mention what me and Nelson talked, and the guy that I went through, I spoke with him, and he has a reputation of taking authors' books, and as he's editing, he's either adding or taking things out, and the authors actually don't even know. He's not consulting with them until their book's actually out. And I worked with a guy, and not to say my experience was a good experience. He did a great job editing, and he left my story alone. Which brings me to what you said about CreateSpace. I set up something like that, and I paid for, it's like an ISBN, a certain number. And I actually have a story on there now that I'm working with, where I'm trying to publish myself rather than...
Yeah, most people use CreateSpace because that does kind of influence. If a publisher or an editor is going to change your words, it will probably influence whether or not you go the self-publishing route. Because a literary agent or a publisher seeks a trend that's going on in the right now, what the next trend is. If it's vampires, sparkly vampires, or if it's aliens, that's what the trend is, and they're going to move your book towards that trend. If they don't like something they want you to change it. They typically will tell you to change it themselves. Now that's the one thing is I like to have control over what comes out, the stream that comes out, and that is why a lot of people, self-publishing is actually, interestingly, it is like the future of book writing.
I think you're probably right.
You see that in a lot of places.
The other thing that's important to note is there's a lot of different sort of levels of editing. For example, if you go through CreateSpace, you go through Lulu, any of the Publish America, any of these self-publishing companies, they're going to offer you an editing deal with their in-house people, and I can tell you from experience, because I freelance edit for people who have gotten burned by some of the self-publishers. What you're actually paying for is for somebody to run like a spell checker through.
Yeah.
I've actually seen some of these books that have made it through and I am not joking, $1,000 editing job, which is really ridiculous. And they will have all kinds of issues where, for example, the word there is spelled correctly, but not in the correct usage. You know, some of the punctuation conventions, like they're still using double spaces after periods. Quotation marks are not aligned properly, like they don't close over the words, there's two open quotations. And this is the kind of thing that you'll get for a $1,000 editing job from a self-publisher. So if you're trying to decide which way to go, I really recommend finding an independent editor and
Like
proofreader
Chris Rickert.
and not paying people. I am available. But not taking on anything right now. If you go through a small publisher, you have a higher likelihood of getting a very quality proofreading job and editing notes where they will say, I think you should go back in and change these things. If you go through one of the big publishers, Simon & Schuster, Random House, the Stephen King publishers, these guys, you're going to work with an editor that basically sits down with you and says, you have to take that chapter out. And I don't like this character, you need to change it. So they're still going to let you change it, but they're going to give you directives. You have to change the things or they won't publish the book. So those are kind of the options of editing in publishing.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like you choose your own battle
Yeah.
kind of thing with editors. I mean, I've been pretty good with the editing jobs that they've done on some of the stories, and some of, you know, and it's in most decent you know, if you are a writer and you're looking to submit something to a publisher and they accept it, part of the contract clause should read, any edits or changes will be discussed with the author prior to publication. And that actually happened with the last the story I sent to Grinning Skull. They sent me my entire story back with just, you know, little tweaks and stuff like this, like, you know, there's always a better way to say something sometimes. And if, you know, like, please take a look at, you know, these suggested changes, and if you don't like anything, you know, send it back. And, you know, and there was plenty that I didn't like, and I sent it back. I'm like, here's why it's this way. This is, you know, the story takes place in England, and there's a different vernacular and style of speech, and so I'm like, that's how this is said here. And they were like, okay, cool, aces, you know, thank you for catching, you know, and I'm like, thank you for catching this comma that was in the wrong shitty spot. Shot it back to them, and everybody just smiles. You know, but I mean, that's something that you have to be careful of when, you know, there are editing suggestions. Or if you are going to self-publish, make sure you're not getting bent over a table for it.
Oh God, we could do a whole nother panel just on self-publishing contracts.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, we probably should the next meeting.
September.
It's super important for any
Oh, sorry.
writer. Oh, I'm sorry.
We've got a question back there.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Can we be quiet? I'm trying to ask a question.
You young catalyst, shut up.
Speaking of editing, how many drafts do you guys usually go through before you consider a piece done?
That's what I was just gonna comment on, is that I think it's, I'm sorry, I think it's super important for every author to go through, and I'll go through it like sometimes even 10, like I'll keep reading it over and over. Edits. You can tell, even after a work has been submitted to an editor, whether or not the author put time into editing that piece. Because even an editor can't fix, you know, a problem that someone has not put the passion into, my personal opinion. Okay?
Did you actually, like, tell one of your stories in a book without even having to read it, where you can just pretty much know by memory from how many times you had to go back over and read?
Possibly, but I also, I mean, I have 19